Don't be confused. That is not a weakness. It is not a problem with your personality. You are not crazy. You're not suffering from mental illness. You're not. All of these things are really important for me to go, this is perimenopause. The solution is not an antidepressant medication for me. It is true for, this is not a serotonin deficiency.
You're listening to the Brave OT podcast with me, Carlin Nink. This podcast is all about empowering occupational therapists to step up, level up, blaze some trails, and maybe engage in a little conscious rebellion in service of our profession, our clients, our work, our businesses, and living our mission wholeheartedly. We are all about keeping it real, doing hard things, unhustling, being curious, exploring, growing through our challenges, and finding joy, fulfillment, and vitality as we do so. Really, we're OTing ourselves and each other. I hope you love this episode. I am thrilled to share this authentic and vulnerable conversation with you. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Fiona Lovely. With nearly 2 decades of experience, she is a trailblazer in women's health, specifically focusing on the menopause transition, perimenopause. We will share stories that highlight how community and shared experiences can be a bedrock for growth and healing. Fiona's insights about the perimenopause journey and menopause, bolstered by recent research, shed light on the many misconceptions we face. Spoiler alert, there's a lot in there about social justice. We talk about the mental and physiological shifts women encounter during this time of renovation in our bodies and in our brains, and some myths about cognitive decline. This episode is packed with wisdom, practical advice, and a heartfelt conversation. Whether you're an occupational therapist, someone experiencing perimenopause, or you're simply interested in understanding this vital aspect of health, there's so much here for you. Today's episode is sponsored by Jane, a clinic management software and EMR that helps you handle your clinic's daily admin tasks so you can free up your evenings and weekends. The Jane team understands how precious your time is and recognizes that charting can often be the most time-consuming admin task for practitioners. That's why they're here to help. To save you from having to start your chart notes from scratch, you can check out Jane's template library, which gives you access to templates that have been generously created and shared by health and wellness practitioners in the community. Once you have a template you like, you can choose to customize it further with charting tools such as range scales, text fields, checkboxes, and more. To see how Jane can help you spend more time doing what you love, head to the show notes to grab the link and book a personalized demo. Or if you're ready to get started, you can use the code VITALITY at the time of sign up for a 1-month grace period applied to your new account. Dr. Lovely, or as I would call you, Fiona, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. I can't wait to dig into all of this discussion, perimenopause, menopause, cognitive function. Let's dive in. Could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, by the way, for allowing me to share this space with you. You and I have always had great conversations, and so I anticipate that today will be a good conversation too. So I hope I can bring something useful to your listeners and your community.
Thank you.
Yes, you bet. Thanks for having me. So my professional designation is as a chiropractor, and I have been in practice nearly 20 years. And really early on in my practice, like the first month or two, I had a patient come in that was a woman in her 40s that had recently had a child, and she was desperate for information on menopause, but she wasn't getting any help from her doctors.
Yeah.
And I happened to have the information because I had taken the functional medicine training when I was in school. And for myself, to be honest, because I was gaslit by a gynecologist in my 20s, and I wasn't going to let that happen for myself again.
Mhm.
And I never expected I'd be practicing through the lens of talking to women about the hormonal health and women's health, but they literally pulled me in right from the start. And so I can still remember very vivid details about that patient, and I hope she's doing well. But she literally called me to the mat. She was like, nope, you've got this information. And of course, I had lots of time, right? I just had a handful of patients. I was fresh out of school.
Yeah.
So I just shared what I knew. And it started something in me that many years later still smolders.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2016, while I was busy doing my chiropractic practice and answered questions as I could for women's health, I started a podcast. And I had never listened to a podcast. I had no idea what I was doing. I figured it's just a lecture. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get behind a mic. Cool. I've been doing that stuff for years. And that's
Flip up a podcast. I feel like that was nice.
well, you know what's nice is I hired a coach. Somebody said to me, there's a podcast coach. I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but here, take my money. It was one of those situations. And thank God I did, because he really showed me the way and the tech. That was the thing that was the most difficult thing at the time. And the podcast launched in April of 2016, and nearly 2 million downloads later, here we are. So it's become a very popular thing. It's a pretty cool experience, and I love it. I love sharing this information with women.
So your podcast is called Not Your Mother's Menopause, which is a brilliant title. Like, tell us what happens here.
Yes, yes. First and foremost, there's a neurochemical change that happens. It's a renovation of the brain that starts for some women around 35, and for a lot of us more closer to 40. So basically anywhere from 35 to 60, we're in that range. And some, depending on what symptoms we're talking about, it can be anywhere from 30 to 60. Okay. It's a huge range of a woman's life.
Yeah.
And then once we end perimenopause and into menopause, now we've got 40% of our lives that we're going to live without the menstrual cycle, without the information about our bodies that comes from the menstrual cycle. But also we've realized that there's a massive knowledge gap from our healthcare providers, certainly on that 40 years, although now in that the 40% of our lifetime.
Yeah.
That's more managed by gerontology, which I think in itself is a problem. But then you've 30 years old to 60 years old, where here's what we think here's what we think women's health is during those years. Bikini medicine, mammograms, and pap smears. That's it. That's unacceptable. And so we've learned recently, through an explosion of research from female practitioners, most of them in our age group, saying, just a minute now, this isn't adding up, right? What's happening? And so we know there's these neurology change, massive change to the brain function. It's a change in function and structure and connectivity. And at the same time, we have these hormonal changes that make for some pretty uncomfortable symptoms. And so we need to be aware that it's starting. Here's something I hear a lot. Oh, and I just heard this yesterday from my pharmacist, who's no more than 2 years younger than me. I'm 51. And she goes, oh, I know it's coming for me. And I'm like, ooh, girlfriend, that's already here.
Yes. It's so true. Because when you go to the doctor, like I did many times with this array of symptoms that I have the awareness was likely connected to perimenopause, they ask, well, do you have hot flashes?
Right.
Well, no, I have some night sweats, but I'm not having hot flashes during the day. Do you have regular periods? I don't know, because I had an endometrial ablation, so I have no periods. Well, you're young, and here I am 45, right? With worsening ADHD, worsening mood, increasing anxiety, feeling socially less connecting, feeling like am I feeling too judgy? Am I too this? Am I too that? My value system's turned upside down. I don't relate to the same people the way I used to anymore. Like, fuck me. And I could go on and on. And, well, there's an antidepressant maybe, or, let's increase your ADHD meds. But I mean, are you having hot flashes? It's
Yes. And what you have just described is all of the common symptoms of perimenopause. And here's the thing about it. We have hot flashes, which are the thing that medicine uses for the signal that we're in menopause. By the way, I've never had a hot flash. Never. 51. Okay, I got all the other stuff, right? But I have a friend that's just done the research on this, and she's just presented it to the Menopause Society last weekend in Chicago. And she looked at the top 10 symptoms. Actually, she looked at more than that. But if you look at the top 10 symptoms of perimenopause, hot flash is number 10. And that's based on the number of women experiencing them. And the other thing that's fascinating about that list is 9 out of 10 of them are brain-based. Brain-based. Okay? We're just starting to have this conversation. We're just starting to understand what it means when estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA start to retreat from the brain and the body. We're just starting to understand what that means. I know one of the things that I had struggled with, especially in the last year, is anxiety doing a freaking tap dance on my brain, which then throws my confidence all off. And now all of a sudden, I'm not connecting to the things that gave me joy for so long. And it's not even just my relationship. I mean, thankfully, I married my best friend. So he at least is there to say, are you all right? Do you just need a bath? Do you need to just swear up a storm? What do you need? But I recognize that not every woman has that, right?
No.
And so there's a lot of guilt that comes with those feelings and experiences. Thankfully, I had a nurse practitioner who said to me, if it's confidence and esteem that is bothering you, that's a testosterone problem. Fascinating, right? Because now that's a whole other thing. Testosterone is a man's hormone, is it not?
Right.
Right? So there's so many frontiers. There's new frontiers across the board in women's health. And it's no longer just about that bikini medicine, but you're describing the most common symptoms. So the thing I think about, Carlin, when I hear your story and when I think about what I've been through in the last few years, I think my mother, my grandmother, the women I have loved and known in my life that are senior to me suffered in silence.
Did. Yeah. Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking. I think often about I come from this very strong matriarchal line, very strong women who had to deal with big shit in this time of life too that I'm in now. And think, oh my gosh, how did they do that with less support, less convenience? Like just the world was different in so many ways. Some of them may be helpful. I don't know. But I think a lot about they had no choice, right? They had no choice to find a way to power through and maybe piss a few people off along the way because they had to stand in their truth and their experience and were under resourced in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I am aware, same with me. I have strong women in my life, in my family on both sides. And I think about the things that they had to go through in their lives. As you said, at a time where things were way less convenient than they are now. And I think as a child, I was aware that they were strong women and I was being raised to be the same. But I have so much more appreciation for just how strong they were now that I'm going through my own uh, graduation, let's say.
Mhm. Just thinking about that, I wish for future generations of women to not have to be so strong, to not have to fight, to stand up for having basic health care that attends to us as women, having the rights that we need, having the
All
supports
of
that
us,
we need. All of us.
not just some of us, all of us.
Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. I am very aware that actually girlfriend and I she's an MD, she and I were having a conversation about this yesterday. She does family and maternal medicine. And we were complaining about between the two of us the lack of information available and the lack of knowledgeable practitioners available to us. And I said to her, I said, and we must remember, you and I have connections and we have the ability to pay for private health care. And that allows us to have better choices. But there are so many more women that do not have that opportunity. And what can we do to help there?
Mm.
I didn't come up with
Why
any answers.
I do most of our doctors when we first go, they'll say, okay, we could test your hormones, but you're a little young and you're not having hot flashes and you're still having your periods. Why don't they know better? What are the reasons for that? And what do they need to know?
Before I was a chiropractor, I have an anthropology degree. And so I always want to know why and how did we get here? Because I think historical context is so important for correcting in the contemporary time, but also let's not forget where we've come from, right?
Yeah.
Let's make sure that we don't repeat the silly things we've done in the past. Med school is taught in such a way that it is very patriarchal. and paternalistic, and women's healthcare has been essentially left out of the conversation. Now, my
Out of the
understanding,
research too, right? That's a
yes,
part of it.
and
Yeah.
I just about to say my
Yeah.
understanding of that is goes back to when there was research on synthetic estrogen called D, and it was such a mess that not only did it result in women birthing babies that had significant abnormalities,
Mhm.
but the children that they birthed went on to have children with the same or similar abnormality. So literally, even though the pills were only taken for a short period of time, I think used for, if I remember correctly, for prenatal nausea.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So, like for morning sickness. And if I remember correctly, please don't quote me on that. Do your own research. Thankfully, Google will produce if you ask those questions. But it was such a mess that a decision was made, and was this in the 50s or the 60s? A decision was made to leave women out of the research. First of all, because our bodies were unpredictable because of the nature. I mean, we have a 28 to 30-day circadian rhythm where a man has a 24-hour rhythm, right?
Right. Right.
So far more predictable. And also, whatever goes on in our bodies could potentially be carried on to the next generation, as it turned out, unfortunately, a generation after that as well.
Was that by thalidomide?
Yeah, it was pre-thalidomide.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Again, do the research,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody. It's been a while since I looked at that data, but I wanted to know. So I went and looked, why is this happening? And it wasn't until 1994 that women were actually put back into the research. And then, of course, it wasn't long after that that we had this Women's Health Initiative thing that said women cannot take hormones, period. And I was like, well, wait a minute, isn't everybody taking birth control?
Mhm.
Isn't that a hormone? The idea that progesterone or estrogen can give you breast cancer? Also weird. Like, we've got so much of it, right?
Yeah.
It turns out it's the stuff that the manufacturers change chemically that increases our chance of breast cancer, heart disease, stroke, and heart attacks. So it was a matter of asking the right question, as it always is when these research things comes up. Right? So when it comes to the Women's Health Initiative, which was the study that came out in 2001, it said that that pulled our mothers and our aunties and our grandmothers off their hormones.
Yep.
It's now all been retracted. They made several mistakes. It was a poorly done, I don't know, it was a $1 billion study from the National Institutes of Health. I have no idea how they made so many mistakes in it, but they're aware of where the mistakes were and have retracted them. There's all kinds of information available about that online. When I look at that now, I think two things. We must have been, here's the woo, we must have been spellbound. How did we not see that we were left out
Mm.
and we were left to fend on our own? We're 51% of the global population. How did we not know that?
Mhm.
Somehow the blinders have been pulled off recently. That spell has been broken. Something's gone on. But the other thing I think that's in the same lines is this Women's Health Initiative. We have all of these examples historically of how women have been disempowered, kept small, kept weak, whether it was starving ourselves during the supermodel era to try to think we could look like these beautiful women that had body and bone structures that were not at all like the average person. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're starving ourselves to be healthy, whatever. Well, there's all these examples of ways in which we are covertly told a thing that keeps us weak, sick, disempowered, etc. And I happen to think that the Women's Health Initiative may be one of those not so covert things. When you take a woman away from her hormones, when you deny her muscle health and bone health and heart health and brain health, guess what? We're pretty compliant, right? We're pretty reliant on the system to take care of us in Canada, anyways, as socialized medicine. But we're not lippy. We're not sharing our wisdom.
Uh-uh. I have tingles and tears and like this giant thing in my chest expanding right now, and I feel this thing that in this time of our lives we are stepping into our power as we start to be more values oriented and less caregiving oriented, right? We come into this place where we're like, okay, I've done a lot of caring for others. And now what do I want to stand for? What message do I want to share with the world? Like we stand into this power and now we're freaking tired and anxious and disempowered. And then the others must think that we've lost it. Like that we've become a wild woman. Like you can see why these women were burned at the stake because when they stepped into their power and shared their voice. And so there's this
They
thing
were
where
extinguished.
yes, yes, exactly. And so as we come into this perimenopause, I felt this shift where I feel this calling to speak a stronger message. And at the same time, I'm so damn tired. And at the same time, I can't focus. And at the same time, it's just there can be that little bit of like you talked about where if you feel a little bit shy or are they judging me or have I just said too much? Or somebody says, "How are you doing?" You're like, "Oh my god, like it's been terrible." That's a little awkward. That's an awkward social engagement on the playground.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's that push and pull at the same time that is so hard.
A few things come to mind. First of all, I feel all of that. As you're saying that, it gives me goose pimples too, makes me want to cry too, because keeping women tired is how we get kept in the box, right? And I struggle with this too. Now, it's always a crapshoot when I do these interviews, whether or not I'm going to have a great night's sleep. I had a great night's sleep last night, thank God. But the first one I did recently where the gal who interviewed me still emailing me, so like, "Did you get some sleep last night?" I try not to worry and we're awful about it. I get it, I get it, I get it. Again, when we are without our strength, we cannot stand against a system that has repressed us for a very long time. So I think personally that self-care thing becomes it's not just it used to be cute. We used to talk about self-care, take an extra bath or close the door on your bedroom and read a book so your kids leave you alone. That's great.
Class, go to yeah, take a little girls' night out.
Yep. Go for a walk, have a coffee, right? Yeah, cute. All of those things are excellent. But the deeper I get into my own perimenopause, the more I recognize that my present state and frequency is not only the thermostat for my relationship with my husband, but it's the thermostat for my interactions with my patients, and that I have a social obligation to make sure I am taking care of myself to the best of my ability. And as you said, we move from caregiver mode to values mode. I would say most women have no idea what their values are.
Absolutely.
They would guess, right? So when it comes to the fatigue, this is one of those things where I start to look at the evidence. Maybe you saw I posted this on Instagram. I think it was over the weekend in Canada, here in Ontario in particular. They're looking at changing the iron marker as what is abnormal. And this is one of the most common things I see with women in my practice for fatigue is they have untreated anemia.
Mm, interesting.
And what happens is women go, "Oh, my doctor said it was no big deal." Are you kidding me? Of course somebody would say that to you.
Right.
That's BS. Let me explain to you what that means. You don't have enough iron.
Yeah.
You cannot carry the oxygen to the parts of your brain, especially the frontal lobe, which is the part that makes you brilliant. Of course, they say, "Oh, it's no big deal." Of course. Remember, the doctors are not the problem here. The doctors were taught in a shitty system.
They were.
The doctors are aware that this is a problem. The wise ones are. And they're like, how do we fix this? But it's the Titanic. It's the Titanic heading for the iceberg, right? So how do you turn around something that is so enormous and funded by Big Pharma? And so this is a problem. We've got the problem. So it's left up to women like you and me and the listeners of your show to fill in the gaps, which is why I do not stand for 1 second for somebody who has a traditional medical education bashing me or my colleagues or anybody that is outside of traditional medicine for talking about menopause. You guys didn't answer the call. We stepped up and tried to help as best we could in a job that you should have been doing all the way along. Sorry, I got
Oh,
oops.
right. There's good. This is really good. And I have a couple questions about then what do we do? So I'm thinking most of my listeners are occupational therapists.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you in a moment, how can we, when we're seeing our clients struggling or ourselves, how can we help them get the information and care that they need? But I'm going to first tell you my how I tried to go about this. So I switched doctors. My doctor retired. She was great. And so I spoke to a colleague who I asked somebody who's mental health oriented, mental health aware, that sort of thing. And so got this other doctor. She was young and awesome, but I was talking on and on about the symptoms I've shared. And I kept saying, I think it's perimenopause. No, your hormones look good. And I know that the blood work that we do is showing if I'm within a range in a moment in time, which could be any point in my cycle. And that blood test that they're doing isn't likely going to tell the story. And after years, I finally took, and I had gone to a naturopath and I had gone to you and I done a whole bunch of things too. And I knew I needed some hormones. I knew it. So I took in my bag of supplements, everything I've bought and I've been trying, and my magnesium and my vitamin Bs and my vitamin D and all the things I was trying, and L-theanine and L-tyrosine and lots of things. I took in, there's an Australian assessment. I think it's actually designed to track which menopause symptoms are changing as a person goes on hormone replacement therapy. I think I found it because of Mary Claire Haver on TikTok. And so I took that in as my kind of baseline and said, here's all my menopause symptoms, because it's not just hot flashes. And so ticked them all off and said, if you can't help me, can you please refer me to, and I brought in a referral form for a local clinic that deals with menopause. And she said, oh, okay, sure. Actually, we have somebody in house who can help you with this. There's a gynecologist here. Why don't I book you in with her? Are you serious? Like, we've been years going around this, and I had to bring in my bag of tricks and a referral form and an assessment form that I sourced from TikTok and then was given the referral. And it was really frustrating. It was really, and I really like my doctor. She really has great intentions and does a lot of great things. But so I'm curious, how can we get the best out of our doctors? How can we advise our clients to get the best out of their doctors?
I'm going to put this back to you for a
Okay.
second.
Okay.
Did you get what you needed from the gynecologist?
Yes, 8 months later.
Exactly. Now, here's the statistics on gynecology and gynecology's training on menopause. 1 in 5 feels like they have adequate training, which means 4 out of 5 gynecologists have inadequate training in menopause, and that is their own survey. So gynecology is not necessarily a solution, right? I know when I first went to my own GP and said, I'm not sleeping, I'd like to try bioidentical progesterone. Of course, you say the words bioidentical to somebody in traditional medicine, and they're just like, "Rip, that's not my thing."
Yeah.
Listen, you'd give it to a woman who was at risk of miscarrying. It's the same thing, but you didn't know it was bioidentical until I said,
Yeah.
oh, she gave it to me, but she said, I'm going to have to refer you to gynecology, which never actually manifested. I don't know why, but probably it was pre-pandemic. So it was, who knows what happened.
Yeah.
The gynecology triage probably looked at this and went, this is not for us.
Yeah.
Right. So I was left on my own to do that. Now I have the information so I could do it. Now I have a nurse practitioner, and it seems to me in where we live, nurse practitioners have the ability to pivot around these things much easier. Again, we have the ability to pay for private healthcare here in Alberta. And so this is what I'm talking about. I pay out of pocket for that. But she's done a better job of taking care of my comprehensive health, including brain and heart, because those are the two things I'm most concerned about as I age. I want to know those two things. I want the preventative stuff there. I
Yeah.
don't just want the, oh, oops, you've got heart disease. Here's the list of medications that I saw people in my family have. A gynecologist isn't always the greatest option. And quite often what happens is women in our age group that are sent to gynecology either leave with the birth control pill, because at least that's hormones that the gynecologist is familiar with, which, by the way, are way higher amounts of hormones than we actually need, than HRT would be. Okay. Or we're sent home with synthetic progesterone, which is the problematic substance from the Women's Health Initiative that said that synthetic progesterone increased breast cancer. Breast
Yeah.
cancer was the thing there. That's not the answer.
No.
There's all kinds of research that says the safe way to do HRT now is a topical estrogen, potentially a topical testosterone if you need it, and that's why we test, and a bioidentical progesterone. There are no increased risks. In fact, quite the opposite. Women that are taking this sort of regime have a much better, if they do end up with breast cancer, have a much better outcome. We live longer. We're healthier. And when I heard that first, I thought, that's really such a pivot. And then I started to think about the older women that are in my practice, the women who are in their 70s and 80s, the ones that come running in from the parking lot, like no frailty whatsoever. They're sharp as a tack, sharper than me in my own perimenopause. And guess what? They never stopped taking the hormones that their doctors gave them pre-Women's Health Initiative study.
Huh.
Or retraction, I should say. So it's an interesting thing to ask that question. I think ultimately you have to go in as an informed consumer to your medical doctor.
Mhm.
I mean, look at what happened when you did that.
Mhm.
And by the way, doctors get, if they're lucky, they get 1 to 3 hours of nutrition. So they don't know anything about your supplements, right? They have no clue, not like zero. And you walked in and said, here's how I'm tracking things,
Mhm.
right? This is what it's looking like. Can we post the link to that? I'm familiar with the Australian study, Australian questionnaire. Let's post it with the show notes so that women have something that they could take to their doctors. Here's how I handled this as a chiropractor for my patients because I can't prescribe. I literally have a form letter that I send to their GP. I send it with the patient. I call it Well Woman Care. Okay. Obviously, they're going to understand that this woman is between the ages of 30, and hopefully that's enough of an indicator to say, hey, by the way, we should probably be looking at some things. And I can address the labs situation here in a minute. Remind me, because I'll continue to go off on a tangent. Okay. Unmedicated, undiagnosed ADHD over here. You're like, oh my God, explains everything.
That's why I like you. The people that I actually gel the most with, it's because we share that ADHD-ishness. I wear it and enjoy it in others.
Which is good. I know, I just call it out now. I'm like, "Sorry, there's a magpie in the room, like, I have to acknowledge the magpie. Okay, now we can get back to the conference." Anyways, so I send a form letter where I literally check off, these are the blood tests I want to see done, and always ask a question. Don't make it seem give the doctor the opportunity to be the last one speaking, right? It kind of helps with the ego thing that can
Yeah.
go along with that paternalistic system.
Yeah.
And this is even the women in the system, right? We were all just taught it. I was taught it too, right? I had to unlearn it. I always say something like, would Carlin be a good candidate for topical estradiol and bioidentical progesterone? Question mark.
Yeah.
And then send it off to the patient. And I would say most of the feedback I get from those letters, which comes back to me from the patient, is that the doctor was so grateful that there was another person watching.
Mhm.
Right? And what fine, here's the requisition. And if that doesn't work, then for me, I can order private testing for patients. But again, that's an out-of-pocket expense.
Yeah.
And I can always refer to my own nurse practitioner or some others that I know. Now, in the States, if there are OTs listening that are in the States, there are great telemedicine clinics that are specific to women's care at midlife that
Mhm.
do a great job. And I've had a couple of them on the show, CEOs. I think there's another one coming in January on the show. But they seem to have a lockdown on the protocols and they take insurance and they can speak to you basically whenever, wherever.
So we want to find somebody who's done some extra training. Ideally, if we're choosing our own practitioner, we're wanting to have somebody who has some extra expertise in menopause. But I'm hearing that there are ways to request the medical team to look at this. And I like that way of just saying, would they be? And it poses that question where they have to think, what would make them not? Yeah. Okay. Like they have to actually justify it. It's in their mind as they're answering that question.
Yeah, it's the open-ended question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it helps. And this is good for patients, for women that want the care. It doesn't necessarily have to go through a community healthcare practitioner like the OT or the chiropractor. It can literally just be the same query. Am I a candidate for these things? And I recorded an entire episode on this because I wanted to give women the language to use with their own doctors, because I think that language is really important. Not Your Mother's Menopause, episode 102, How to Talk to Your Doctor About HRT, I think will be really helpful for a lot of women.
Perfect.
And that's the feedback I'd had in the office as well.
Wonderful. I will link it. That's really helpful. Can you tell us a little bit about cognitive function more specifically? We've talked about some of those emotional things. We've talked about a little bit, but women often report brain fog. I notice women who being diagnosed with ADHD in this time, but those who already have it too notice it worsening a ton. Tell us a bit more about what the science says about cognitive
Yeah.
function.
So
Sorry.
we're not 100% sure. What we do know is that there's quite a few factors.
Okay.
And I think this is part of why women's healthcare at menopause can be quite difficult to practice, because every single woman is different, right?
Right.
So here's what we know. We know that the fuel system changes. We move from glucose to another fuel system, and with that, things slow down. We know that most women have some sleep depravity or sleep issues that happen at perimenopause.
Right.
That makes us brain foggy. We know that there is a loss of gray matter volume. We know that there's a loss of blood supply. We know that the neural connections pare themselves down. Again, it's that renovation. Those are words used by Dr. Lisa Mosconi, whose research is the best contemporary research on a woman's brain at perimenopause. Please read her books, they're excellent.
Yeah.
I reference her research all the time. By the way, just as an aside here, just this morning, I read that for the very first time they'd done MRI scans on a pregnant woman's brain, because we know that the brain changes at pregnancy.
Yeah.
This is how behind we are. And it turns out that a lot of the things that change in pregnancy are also the same things that happen in perimenopause with this fuel system changing, the connectivity. We've got shrinkage of certain areas of the brain. What's interesting about that is that it's the same areas of the brain that are involved in Alzheimer's disease. Okay. 80% of Alzheimer's cases are women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's interesting to look at that and go, and this is Mosconi's research. She's the one who said, okay, why all these women in my family have Alzheimer's? What's happening? So she was the one to say, we better start imaging women's brains. And for some women, based on genetics, there is a switch at menopause with the decline of estrogen that starts to turn on the processes of Alzheimer's. That's ultimately what we understand is happening in a woman's brain. And it's like, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's quite something. It's quite something to think about. Here's the thing I want to leave the listener with.
Okay.
This has been critical for me, for my own thinking, because as I'm going through this, I can feel all these things come up,
Mhm.
and not all of them, but a lot of them are like, okay, Fiona, don't be confused. That is not a weakness. It is not a problem with your personality. You are not crazy. You're not suffering from mental illness. You're not. All of these things are really important for me to go, this is perimenopause. The solution is not an antidepressant medication for me. It is true for, this is not a serotonin deficiency. Okay. Is what I'm saying. It's an estrogen change. Right. It's been really important for me to look at all of that and say, all right, we need to make sure that I'm supporting all the systems that are supporting my brain health for sure. So once you have that lens with which you can see the way the brain is changing, it's really important that, for years, I just heard women say at this age, I'm losing my mind. My
Mm.
mother was dementia. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. Like, is this how it's happening? So here's the important thing to take away. Within 4 years of the last menstrual period, and quite often much sooner than that, our brain function returns to where it was pre-perimenopausal changes. So this is not forever. Exactly. Isn't that so much? It's so relieving, right? And there's important elements to that to remember. Testing on women in our age group. Okay, you and I probably don't. I know this is true for me, so I won't speak for you, but you can tell me what you think for yourself. For me, I'm not nearly as sharp as I was 10 years ago, and I miss that brain.
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate it. Right? Now, oh my God, how do I get back to her?
I
Right?
would
A
take the
lot.
brain over the body and the lack of wrinkles and
Yeah.
their hooves. Right, just bring the brain back.
Yes, exactly. So here's the interesting part. Cognitive testing done on women pre-perimenopause and post-menopause show that even though we report feeling like our brain is taking a dip, function didn't change at all. We had the same executive processing, the same cognitive function. It just didn't feel as maybe as quick on the inside.
Sure.
Isn't that so relieving?
That is relieving. Yes. Is there an objective dip in the middle and then it's back after? Like we get back to baseline, but we don't feel like we're back to baseline? Is that what I'm hearing?
Another way to say it would be we perceive that we're not as sharp as we were 10 years ago, but the testing shows that there is no dip in function.
Okay.
Fascinating, right?
Even in the perimenopause.
Even in perimenopause. Yep. And I'm trying to remember which of the books Moscone references this, and it may actually be in her research paper because she went about saying, okay, so now we can see what the changes are.
Yeah.
But anybody that wants to know more about this, please go read her research papers. And it's the one in particular where she talks about how the menopause brain changes. She has a whole book on it that's just come out in February this year called The Menopause Brain.
Okay.
And in there, she talks about this very thing. We never lose that function. We think we do. It's a perception.
Yeah.
But that on testing, we don't lose functionality. Now, that said, the brain is still undergoing, this is how amazing women are. The brain is still undergoing the renovation of perimenopause that's signaled by the egress of hormones. Estrogen is the big one here, but certainly progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, cortisol are part of that. We have that perception, but we never actually have that dip in function. And you know what? The day that I didn't have the great sleep and I had the beautiful interview,
Yeah.
I was just praying like hell that was true. Otherwise, people are going to think I'm a dip, and that's the end of this discussion. Next episode. That's funny.
I feel like I've gotten good at winging it based on experience, right? That's
100%.
on those tired days, I can go, okay, this might not be quite as organized or well planned, but it's still going to be really good. Whatever me and that client do, or whatever presentation I need to do, or something like that. That's when it comes down to it and I'm in my zone, it will come together, even if I didn't have the energy to work out all the details ahead of time.
Yes, absolutely. And as I think I said to you at the start of this conversation, I can't remember if it was before you press record, but as clinicians that work with clientele, we are good on our feet.
Yeah.
Neither of us is new at this job. So at some point, muscle memory is going to kick in.
Yeah.
But here's something interesting. I had over the weekend, I had a patient come in, guy I've seen for years and years with a new shoulder injury. And I did all the testing without writing anything down because I can remember this. But then at the end of my day, when I was tired and I was hungry and I sat down to do his soap note,
Yeah.
do you think I could puzzle my way through the shoulder exam flow? No way.
Yeah.
I literally had to pull out the textbook and remind myself of the names of the tests because I knew he was going on to physio and the physio would want to know that. Right. So that's a pretty good example of it. I just needed the clues. The information was there, but I just needed the clues.
Can I share a tip that something I've been using? Can. So I've been using AI for documentation. So there are a lot of them out there. The one that I've been using is the free version of Heidi Help. I know, so Jane is a sponsor, the EMR. They're a sponsor of the podcast, and I know they're also working on one that will be integrated. But at this point, I open up my two assistants, Jane and Heidi, on my computer. And so Heidi, it will listen, and then you press transcribe at the end of the session, and you can request what type of note you want it to create from what's been verbalized in the session. And it will create a note. So there are some basic soap notes in there, and it's done a really good job. I've also adjusted the template, so it's a little bit more oriented to the format that I like to chart in. And it does a really good job from mental health to phys med. I have a client who he takes it out on home visits and uses his phone for it.
Yeah.
And the notes are not 100%. They still require you to give it a human touch, which is important.
Yes. Fascinating.
Mhm.
Fascinating. I will be looking into that. Did you say it was Heidi Health or Heidi Help?
Heidi Health.
Health. Okay.
There are a bunch of other ones, so that all meet the requirements of our privacy regulations and that sort of thing.
Sure.
This is not ChatGPT that's taking our information and putting it into a pool. It's you just delete it after. You're not even keeping the recording. It's just transactional for creating that note.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't use Jane in the office yet, but God knows it's a conversation that keeps coming up because we've got 2 clinics, there's 30 practitioners. It is talk about a Titanic that needs to be turned around when you're switching EHR. But it's definitely, I don't know, that's something I could do on my own and have my own notes as part
Yeah.
of that.
And
Yeah.
Heidi Health is a standalone app. You can use it. I just copy and paste it over into my Jane, but I know
Amazing.
Jane is working on an integrated one. And I know a lot of the EMRs, that's obviously it's the cutting edge, right? They're all working on it. They just have to make sure they're meeting all of that functionality and that privacy and those types of things before fully releasing it. But
Jane's
I
the bomb.
Jane's got it in beta right now.
Yeah, nice. Jane's the bomb. Talk about good Canadian company. I'm such a fan.
Thanks. Yes, I've been enjoying working with them. Very human, but am enjoying this conversation. So, what is on deck for you? What are you leaning into right now?
A couple of things. I am writing a book on the cognitive impacts of menopause. And this is a book that's been a long time coming. And I think when I started writing it, it was a generalist book about menopause. And we are past, thanks to TikTok and Instagram, etc., women are getting that information much quicker. So that's a heart contract for me, HERT, because it just feels like a full circle thing that is to be done. I have so many women that I'm so blessed to be in community with that have listened to my show for so many years. That feels like a gift to them. So I'm working on that. For quite a few years now, I've taught a menopause doula certification, and I'm taking that training to the next level, if you will, which is going to be available as a group offering hopefully in early 2025 is the plan. Yes, thank
I'm on
you.
your wait list.
Well, and anybody who wants to be on the wait list for the launch can go to menopausedoula.society.com and you can sign up for the wait list there. And then as soon as me and my team have more information about when that's launching, you'll be informed of that. So I'm excited about that because there are many women that do not have the professional designation
Mhm.
like we do. And there are many women that do have the professional designation that need that basic sort of training. How do you help a woman who is in her, what I like to call hot girl phase? There's lots of women like us that want a deeper understanding, maybe not to go right back to professional school, because here's the problem. Who's even teaching menopause medicine, right?
Right. Yeah.
Still figuring it out. They're still figuring out who's going to be the one to manage this. I'm excited about that. And those are 2 of the big projects. I have such awesome experts I get to interview on my show. That's
Mm.
something else I'm just loving at this phase of my life is just inviting other women into my community and sharing the wisdom that they have gleaned from their own experience and training and etc. And that's a really fun thing. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
I do. Yes, I definitely do. When I was also contemplating starting a podcast, I've always described it as with if I were to go to a party, I don't like to be in the big room trying to get a word in edgewise in the big conversation. Like you're gonna find me in the kitchen having a really deep conversation with someone.
Yes.
And so I kind of thought, oh, social media marketing, like all the Facebooking and stuff is quite exhausting for me. And it feels like trying to connect with many. And I have made some beautiful connections from that, but where beautiful connections come are where we go deeper, not putting out another reel or something. Though I do that for sure, but I also have hired help for that. I like this. I like having a good, deep conversation. And that feels almost effortless. And it feels like I'm serving at my highest when I can share in this intimate way with people, where you and I are having an intimate conversation that's deeply authentic. And we're in somebody's ear, in their kitchen, in their car, on their walk, as they're folding laundry. And that feels so connecting for me, even though that
Me
person's
too.
not right here. you and I are connecting in the conversation, and then I hear from the people where they say, "Oh my gosh, I had to pull over when you said that," or I just love that we get to be in people's ears in their homes and in their personal lives as we share what is true for us.
It's so special, and you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I love that too. It feels, if I know how I consume that content myself,
Yeah.
like this morning when I was driving in here, I was listening to a thought leader that I follow in a class that she did, and I could have just been in the class with her, and that's the beauty of it, right? I mean, she lives in California, and I'm not. I'm in Alberta. I can't be there with her, but I can be there. She can be with me. It's a
Uh,
beautiful thing.
it is really beautiful. I listen to podcasts in the bathtub a lot. I don't know if the people I don't know if you know that you've been in the bathtub with me, but
I had a feeling. I laid in the bathtub. I've got one of those seal pouches and I put my tablet inside it. And yeah, my husband made me a shelf for it. So it's like my water and there's my glasses and sometimes a bit of chocolate. It just depends on what I need.
a girlfriend of mine told me that a chip bowl floats in the tub. To for popcorn in the tub. I was like, I've never thought to take popcorn to the tub. How did I not know this? I'm glad I could teach you something today. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I knew it would be. And anytime I get to talk to you, it is a good conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I so enjoy the time we get to visit. We've done it twice now this year. This is fun. What's
Yeah.
next?
What's next? I don't know. I think you need OT on your podcast, maybe.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, let's figure that out. Yes.
I have a couple questions I ask everybody at the end. Are you ready?
I am so ready.
What does being brave mean to you?
Stepping out of my comfort zone. Yeah, stepping out of my comfort zone. It would have been really easy for me to just stay a chiropractor and focus on nothing but spinal health for people. But there's some part of my programming that just says if there's a need for social justice in some way, I'm stepping up, even if I'm scared as hell. And in a strange way, menopause, talking about menopause the way I have, is that thing that feels brave.
Yeah. I'm so grateful you have.
Thank you.
What is something brave you've done recently?
I recently started working with a new therapist specifically for grief because I could feel the weight of the passing of my parents in the last few years, as well as some beloved fur family members, and the grief that we all experienced. I think most people, I shouldn't say all, but most people experienced some form of it during the pandemic. And I had a business and that literally got put to the side and patient care, people I couldn't check in with. That was very difficult for me. And so there's a lot of grief that, and I just realized one day earlier this year that it was still hanging in there. And I'm like, you know what? I know that's the stuff that makes for disease.
Yeah.
And I don't want it in me. And I have no idea how to even scratch the surface on bringing it out. So I did my research and I found a great therapist, and I've been working with her now for a couple of months, and I feel a lot lighter. And that feels brave to me because I know that, first of all, it's so cliche. I show up at our visits with a box of Kleenex under my arm, like serious.
Surely she has some, but you've brought your own just in case.
But our meetings are virtual because she practices in Marta Loop. I don't know if you've been over there recently. It's a mess. There's so much construction. Anyways,
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
So it's so regional to Calgary. But that feels brave to me because it's so easy to just go, no, just don't look. You'll be fine. Just don't look. But that's not health.
No, and if that stuff is really but it just gets louder in other ways, right? Like you talked about, it's your health. The body keeps the score, right? If that stuff is being held under the surface, it is hard to deal with. And so it is brave to bring it out to face fall.
Yeah. And it makes me think of something else, just as you said, I referenced Dr. Vanderkolk's book. Lots of women experience grief at perimenopause. There is a grieving process, especially if we're identified strongly with the mother archetype. And so I think starting to talk about grief and that we can feel is a really important thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
How would you like to see healthcare providers be a little bit more brave?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. I think the fee for service and volume based system that we practice in is problematic in a few ways. And one of those ways that I wish to bring up here is that we have time pressures around interactions with other human beings.
Oh,
And what I'm aware of is that there are many people, men and women, suffering right now with mental health, especially. And it's not easy to bring up. It's not easy to slip into conversation, especially for those of us that are Gen Xers. We were raised by the stoic generation of you don't pop your head up. Tall poppy gets chopped. What's the term? Tall poppy gets cut, something like that. You know what I mean? Blend in, right? Don't show your weakness. Don't do all of those things. And I think a brave healthcare provider sees the humanity in the person in front of them, not just what's the diagnosis? What's the code? What's the medication? What's the treatment? And I think that can be really hard to do when you're pressured in a system that pays you for your time, but not always as well as it should be. And that we have the pressure of a schedule, meaning there's probably other people waiting in the waiting room, etc.
yeah.
So,
And that if we're going over time, yeah, somebody's waiting. And if we block in double the time, we're also not getting paid. Or
and
if
I
it's,
don't know what the answer to that is.
yeah.
I don't. I've always just let my instinct tell me, my gut tell me what feels like the right compensation for my time. And I recognize that I get massively underpaid for my functional medicine work, but I also feel strongly that it should be affordable to most people.
Yeah. And listeners might be surprised to hear this, right? We're here in Canada and thinking about our Canadian healthcare system in many ways does take care of people. And in many ways it's falling short. So you and I both have private practices where we're not being paid by our public health system. Some people have a little bit of healthcare benefits, extended health benefits that might cover some of our services, but not all of them. I know a lot of plans don't even cover OT at all. And we're working on that. And so there are a lot of similarities to the American system where we are charging the individual, and then a bit different too, where if an individual is paying out of pocket to get good service, some people are willing to pay for that extra time, right? And I know a lot of Canadian healthcare providers hesitate to charge for the extra. But if the extra is what that person needs and you're negotiating that, hey, this is what I think you need. Maybe we need to be booking hour and a half sessions. Maybe we need to be booking sessions where we're out in nature walking. I do need to charge for my time to travel there. Or if I need to be communicating with other people and being able to present that as an option to people. Some people can pay for it, not everybody. And I get that. And if I wanted to help everybody, I would probably be working more in the public health system as well. And so I feel we still have some room. We still have some wiggle room to work with that. But there are no clear and easy answers because we're running into values conflicts on at every turn as well and figuring out how to do things ethically and equitably and in ways that aren't sacrificing our own integrity and health and well-being and compensation as well.
It's a
Yeah.
big conversation and it's a brave conversation.
How would you like people to reach out to you?
Yes, good question. All roads lead to and from my podcast, I suppose my website as well, is drlovely.com. That's drlovely.com. The podcast is available on all of the major networks, streaming networks. The podcast is called Not Your Mother's Menopause with Dr. Fiona Lovely. It was named that after a lecture that I did for many years. I traveled around the city here and did those lectures. And so people knew me from that name. And here we are all those years later. So you can reach out through the website. You can also send me a message on Instagram. Both Instagram and TikTok are at Dr. Fiona Lovely. And I do have a team that helps me there. So it may not be me that gets back, but they send those inquiries on to me.
And the doula training that's coming up
Yes.
in next year sometime. People
Yes.
want to get on that list to be notified. It's menopausedoulasociety.com.
.com. That's right. So yes, the Menopause Doula Society is also in the process of being developed as well as the certification training. So that will be the website. We might as well just start sharing it.
Do you think it's kind of like getting training to be the big sister that we all needed in
Oh my
menopause?
God. Great question. Yeah. You know, I think ultimately that question is going to change the framework with which I build this program. Thank you for asking that. That's a great question. I'm aware that women that have stepped up and asked for this training, sort of one on one at this point, are women like you and I that just want to be able to essentially hold a woman's hand and sit with her and say, "You are not crazy. You're not the only one, and you don't have to suffer." So I think the answer to the question is yes. I
Mhm.
love that. Thanks for asking that.
You're very welcome. I just feel it. That's just exactly what I feel. I think about how I talk to my little sister. She's 11 years younger than me, and about the journey ahead. And that I'm grateful that I can share what I've learned and am learning. There's so much more to learn, but
Mm.
that, yeah, our moms didn't get this opportunity, so we didn't get it there.
No, moms were still spellbound, so were our grandmothers.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we learn from the person in front of us. We don't learn from school. We learn from the interaction, the conversation. I mean, we as women heal each other in community. What we're doing now is just returning to the way things were before the system got in and started messing with us.
Mm, we do heal in community.
Mhm.
We do. So my main sort of signature program that I offer is called Activate Vitality. And so it's an interesting thing because when I set out to create this online program, I was thinking about the course and that had a community with it. But I couldn't envision the community without the members, right? Until people started coming together. And years later, I think I started building this thing in 2019. And here we are in 2024. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's the community. It's the circle of women that come
100%.
together and spill it all and share. We share about life. We share about business. We share about what's not working and grief and relationships and efficiencies and how to work maybe a little bit less and how to set boundaries and all of those things. And it is that it's social learning. It's that we've got these mirror neurons where we are influenced so much more easily by others who share a similar mission and a similar language and a similar understanding and coming together in community. We all rise. Isn't there there's a cheesy quote that we could put there, right?
And, and true. Cheesy and true. Yeah. And it's when how's it go? When the water rises in the harbor, all boats rise. Something like that, right?
I'll find
It's kind of way. Um, the water rises, all boats in the harbor, or something. But it's okay. You and I know exactly what we're talking about. That's so powerful for you to remind me of that and our listeners as well. And that is the shift I have seen too in the years that I've been doing online offerings. When I created the Brain Health Master Course, which I haven't talked about here, but it's one of the I do usually once a year. It's kind of getting overshadowed at the moment by the certification, the dual certification. But I put together this beautiful structure. I spent so much time on the videos, the content, and the infographics. And the best part is always the Q&A sessions I hold at the end
yeah.
where I think it's gonna be 60 minutes. I don't dare open it for longer than that because I think people are gonna be bored, and it ends up being 2.5 hours, and we're still talking, and we're still and it's not about me at all. It's about the interaction. It's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing. People need to be seen and heard, and then we co-regulate, and then it's so
Good.
giving all the C's, right? Community co-regulation, compassion, and
Yes.
caring, and we become so much more creative. It's this kind of buzzing hive mind. I found the quote, by the way, "A rising tide lifts all boats."
That's so much more eloquently than I suppose.
That's what we said. It's something about the harbor. It's still
Boats and stuff, things, tide, whatever.
well, I am grateful to sail with you and have you in to be in community with you here locally and that we get to do this.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care of yourself, everyone. Thank you for the time.
I really hope that something in this podcast touched you as a listener. There's a quote by Sark that says, "The circles of women around us weave invisible nets of love that carry us when we're weak and sing with us when we are strong." I'm very grateful to Fiona for being a part of the circle of women I see around me and for being able to share this conversation with you, the listener of the Brave OT podcast. If you're looking for more from Fiona, you can visit her website, drlovely.com. And if you're interested in her menopause doula certification, that website is the menopausedoulasociety.com. Her podcast is Not Your Mother's Menopause. I love that name. And you can find her on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Fiona Lovely. I'll put all these links in the show notes. Now, if you're a therapy business owner who is really craving that sense of community, collaboration, co-regulation, a group of co-conspirators to support your creative endeavor as a business owner and as a whole human, we will be reopening the doors to the Activate Vitality program at the end of January. There will, of course, be a link to that page in the show notes. And I would love to talk to you to see if that is the sort of thing you need to thrive in this coming year. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, be brave, OTs.